Welcome to the ICU podcast, where we explore the vestibular experience through conversations between patients and the health professionals who care for them.
During this podcast, we invite patients to share their stories and healthcare professionals to ask questions so they are equipped to better care for and truly see the invisible challenges faced by their patients. I'm Kimberly Warner.
And I'm Cynthia Ryan, and we are your hosts on this journey of discovery. Welcome, everyone, to our ICU podcast. I'm so excited about this topic of peer support because peer support is such a key pillar to VITA's mission, and actually the way that VITA got started as a support group here in Portland, Oregon. So I'll tell that story as we get going. But first, I just wanted to kind of give an overview of what a support group is. A support group provides a unique and critical service of acceptance. This forum allows individuals to ask questions and to learn in a non-judgmental and safe environment. Participants know that everyone attending the meeting understands and has compassion for the functional difficulties of getting through each day as a vestibular patient. As a result, less frustration and energy are spent proving or defining limitations, and more energy is available for appreciating the character and companionship offered by others and recognizing their own personal self-worth. We know that support groups play an important role in recovering from vestibular dysfunction and helping people discover, quote, their new normal. Today, we'll talk to two people who have experience with the power of peer support. So I'm going to start by introducing one of our guests, Sarah Conover, who is a licensed physical therapist and certified health coach. She helps people recover from dizziness and imbalance so they can get back to work, family responsibilities, and the active pastimes they love. Through one-on-one telehealth visits and her online support group program, Sarah uses a diverse approach to address chronic dizziness, as well as the anxiety and fears that often coexist. Sarah has degrees from the University of Evansville and the University of Indianapolis. She obtained her vestibular competency through the rigorous Herdman program at Emory University in 2005, and also has advanced training in acceptance and commitment therapy, functional nutrition, and mindfulness-based reduction. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We also have David here with us, and I think probably everyone who's listening knows who David is, David Morrill. Actually, let me ask you this really quick. Morrill? How do we pronounce your last name?
It's actually pronounced Morrill.
Morrill.
There's a French pronunciation of Morale, but I go by Morrill, yes.
I like that because you're a very moral human being.
Oh, thank you.
So
also sounds like the mushroom.
Yes, it does, which is tasty.
It's foraging time here in Oregon. Sorry, everybody.
So for those of you who don't know who David is, his vestibular disorder was caused by a stroke. During his recovery, he found himself struggling with constant dizziness and imbalance. He didn't know where to turn until he found VITA, like many of us. VITA helped David understand his disorder and gave him hope that someday he could regain so many things he'd lost to his disability. Today, David gives back to the community who supported him. He is the chair of VITA's Volunteer Ambassador Board. He's facilitated in-person, virtual, and Facebook support groups, and he is VITA's Community Support Coordinator. That's a lot of amazing things that have come from your stroke, David. Welcome to the show. We're excited to have you here with us. Let's actually just cycle in your story a little bit so people know a little bit more about the journey that you've been on and how you got connected with VITA. So David, do you want to jump in?
Sure. My journey began, and I can't believe I'm saying this, almost 10 years ago now. I had a stroke. It was a little bit different than than most strokes. It was tough to diagnose, and I was actually misdiagnosed in our local ER. But after that stroke, it became even more struggle because when with the therapy and the doctors were trying to treat me, they were trying to treat me like a regular stroke patient. But my problem, because I had the stroke in the cerebellum in my brain, it damaged part of my brain. I had mostly imbalance and dizziness, and and I have almost all the same symptoms as a vestibular patient with inner ear problems, other than the food thing or the weather changes. I don't. Luckily, I don't have to endure those. But a lot of the same things that a vestibular patient with inner ear, I had the same type of challenges. And some of the therapists and doctors just didn't understand that because, from what I'm hearing, what I have is not very common. It's a very rare. It has to pinpoint your brain in a specific place. So my journey began with that stroke, and what I found when I was recovering from that stroke, there wasn't a lot of people that understood what was going on, and I went to a lot of therapy, and I even went to some support groups for stroke, but it wasn't gelling with what I had because nobody understood. I was you know I had balance issues and dizziness issues, and nobody understood that. Most of the therapists, I'm not blaming them because they really hadn't seen this, but they were trying to rehabilitate, making sure my legs were strong, my arms were strong. All of that was not affected by my stroke. It was mostly my balance, and I even told the therapist, if I can get my balance back, I think I'll feel a lot better. So
Wow.
that is kind of how my story started. It goes. I mean, my story can go for hours. I know Cynthia's heard a lot of it. That's the short version. I'm a little different than most people, but the passion and the vestibular issues that I have for others is the same as most people that have inner ear problems.
Did you
David, I
find?
think that's so
Oh, go ahead,
so
Cynthia.
I think it's so key what you said about your medical providers, your healthcare providers didn't understand what you were going through, and of course, no one in the stroke community could get what you were going through, and that's really, I think, one of the keys of a support group is that here's a group of people who understands what you're going through and the validation that you get from being with that group. In the beginning, I was talking about how Vita started as a support group. And it was, so this was over 30 years ago when vestibular disorders were even less well known than they are today, and vestibular, especially within the healthcare community, and these patients were going to their healthcare providers and being told it's all in your head. There's nothing I can do for you, and they finally found this one healthcare provider, Dr. F. Owen Black, who was a pioneer in the vestibular medical healthcare industry, and he said, yeah, this is real. This validated what they were going through, and I think you guys should get together. And so they did, and that and the rest is history, as they say. But and since then, we'll get. I'm sure I'm getting off track here a little bit, but since then, support groups, they met in person. Since then, support groups have gone through just these huge changes of, from in person to online to virtual formats. And we can talk more about that. But the core of it is that, support groups provide that validation that you're not crazy, you're not alone. And there are people who, make you feel like a normal person.
Real quickly, David, before we jump in, I want to hear from Sarah, but how did you find Vita? Was it a Google search or?
It's kind of it was a Google search, but indirectly. So I was looking for others because I had dizziness after a stroke, and that was my main symptom. I was looking for others like me. I wanted to find a stroke patient that had dizziness. So I was looking online and Google searching, like you said, and I happened to come across and Cynthia knows well, a professor at Johns Hopkins University. His name is David Newman Toker. He was developing a lot of tools and equipment for people that were diagnosed as a stroke through dizziness, and he was working with that. So I kind of just reached out to him and said, "Am I going crazy? Is this a real thing?" And he said, "Absolutely a real thing. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a bunch of studies, and I want you to be part of these studies." And then he goes, "And also, you have to get a hold of this organization in Portland. It's called Vita. they're the ones that are really in tune with your dizziness and imbalance. So I reached out to Vita, filled out the volunteer application, and I took off. The rest is, here I am, Tim.
Awesome. I think your internet connection might be a little slow, so we only heard part of that. But I think again that's a great example of how this is. It's healthcare professionals connecting with patients, and it's a team. It's especially with support groups, and I'd like to talk more about that. Is some support groups are run by patients, some support groups are run by healthcare professionals. So with that, Sarah, what was your pathway to becoming involved with and leading a support group of people for vestibular dysfunction?
Yeah. So it was kind of a natural pathway. I'm a vestibular physical therapist. I've been a physical therapist for over 35 years. And for the last 20 or so, I've been exclusively treating and working with those with vestibular issues. So it happened. We started a local group in the area where my practice is. I kept having patients just tell me, like David said, where is there another person like me? I feel like I'm all alone. I'd love to talk to another person. And so I kept having people sort of with that same kind of desire. And so with the prompting of a couple of patients of mine, I said, okay, or if we start this, are you going to come? Yes, I'm all in. So we started a local group. And it was just a couple people, sometimes even one showed up for a while. It got, and then it snowballed really, because once people know there's a support system like that, they want to be involved for sure. Really, the biggest drawback was like the driving at night at times, and that sort of kept people at home sometimes. But so that was around 2014. We started meeting in person, and then the lockdowns hit in 2020, and so I took it online. I took the support group online, and actually that Dayton area support group, we actually met. We increased it to, we were meeting once a month, and we increased it to every other week, just because people were needing extra support. That my group was just wanting to be, connecting. And about at that same time is when I started with the Tuesday morning group. I just said, yes, I can take another. It may have been David that asked me, hey, can you take another group? And I said, sure, because it's enjoyable. I'm meeting a lot of new people each month, and yeah, that's how I came upon facilitating support groups.
And Sarah, you don't have a vestibular disorder yourself, correct?
I do not. Okay. I have tinnitus at times from something different, but not. So I can relate to that.
Yeah.
But not
that you need to run a support group. I was just curious if I missed that in your backstory, because I know obviously, David, you started a support group and you have a vestibular disorder. So I'm curious what that's been like for you, living with it inside and facilitating others.
So yeah, I started this out of a need for, I knew others needed it, and there wasn't that many people out there that were doing this type of thing. So I jumped right into it and led it. And it's great to have a patient lead it as well. And I always talk about this with my support when I talk to support group leaders before they join. If possible, I like to have a patient and a professional like Sarah involved with your support group. Because I can do a lot of the patient, how they feel, how they've been, and what they've gone through, whereas clinical people like Sarah, and I'm lucky to have a person right now in my online support group that is helping me facilitate that group as well. And any of the tough clinical questions that come up, she's taken those for me. So, but yeah, it was out of a need for necessity. I didn't see a lot of them around. Like I said, I went to a local support group for stroke. It didn't help me at all because it wasn't they weren't having the same issues that I were. I was having all the balance issues. None of them were having balance issues. It was all muscular and other issues that they were incurring. So I felt that people needed it. So I kind of got one started, and I started locally in Maine, where I was originally from, and then we went from there. I joined Vita. We've done a number of the online groups that Sarah was talking about. We did online groups before COVID. So we were uniquely ready when COVID came to host online support groups.
Yeah. I wanted to say when my first experience with support group actually was with bereavement. There's a group here in Oregon called Dougie Center, and I lost a parent in high school, and I didn't even know support groups existed. And I was 26 years old when I discovered the Dougie Center. And I discovered it, but as a facilitator. So, I should have joined as a participant, but I was probably still I'm better from this grieving process. So I joined in, but as a facilitator, I found it was still very therapeutic, just to be surrounded by people who understood the experience. So I feel like I just wanted to add that because I think whether or not, there are many different ways to participate in these groups. And it's surprising to me that, even organizing the gathering can be therapeutic on some level.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it is. When I was recovering from the stroke and having this, jumping into volunteerism and especially support groups was very therapeutic because not only was I discovering other people that had similar things that I had, but I was also, leading them and helping them, which all obviously helps me recover in my journey as well. So it was very therapeutic. I was kind of part of that group because I was going through a lot of the same thing. Even though I was facilitating it, I'm also a part of that group, telling my story and feeding in with others in the same similar stories that they have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can say from working with all of the Vita support groups, there are some that are led by a patient, some that are led by a healthcare professional, and some that are led by a team of a patient and a healthcare professional. And I think that there are that all of those combinations work. There are certainly benefits to a patient who can share their story and has experience or has developed just by leading the support group, experience facilitating a group, which is actually kind of key to make sure that everybody gets to participate. But I think the healthcare professionals bring a lot too, because patients come with questions that they want answered. And Sarah, I want to ask you about that. As a healthcare professional, what do you feel like you or other vestibular healthcare professionals can bring to a support group? And, what's your experience participating as someone who treats people with vestibular disorders? Because it's a different role than being a healthcare provider.
Oh, for sure. It's a different role. And it's easier as I've gotten more experience facilitating, for sure. It is definitely something you have to work on to be effective in the facilitator's role, because as a clinician, your role is to find the solution and implement, assess and treat. And the support group is, the goal is that everyone is heard and feels supported and has their needs met for coming back on that particular time, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that everyone has to talk the same amount. Sometimes people will just not not want to share quite as much as others, although that's a challenge, because the in facilitating groups, you do want to make sure that even the quiet person has an opportunity to share. We as clinicians, I have heard the stories of thousands of patients with vestibular issues, and so something that I think as a clinician I can bring is that I know the vast variety of symptoms, complaints, experiences. So whereas someone who hasn't heard all those stories, doesn't have that. So that's a difference between a peer and a clinician facilitating. Yes, we can answer questions. And that can be helpful as well. Identifying and explaining the vestibular system, and we know the medical sort of team and how the medical system works, so we can guide and explain those questions. So those are some of the benefits that a healthcare provider, especially one who has been experienced in the field for quite some time, can bring. But I don't think it's essential to a support group by any means. In fact, like I know that I gain a whole lot more from going to support groups than the folks that are attending the support groups do. It's I learn so much, and I'm encouraged, and that's also my style. I have a strong philosophy of optimism and mindset. When I work with my patients and clients as well, and that's why I have a Facebook group that's over 2,000 people in my Facebook group, and I created it because I wanted to control a bit the conversation into a positive conversation, because it can some venues can drag people down, so it's really important to stay positive.
Yeah, that is really hard, actually. I mean, I hear from I hear from people, and I've seen on the the online forums, some people say this group is just too heavy, and often it's because everybody is different, but also people are at a different place in their recovery. And sometimes when you're very early in your recovery, you're going through the grief process, and that's really hard. And it's you just want someone to hear, to listen and validate. And on the other hand, so it can be really hard when you have a lot of sad stories being shared.
And I don't think maybe I didn't present that. I certainly would not want someone not to share a sad story. I didn't really mean sadness. I meant, or grief. Absolutely. There's room for that. We have to hold space for that. And that has absolutely been part of my experience with these groups, but more the negativity. That's kind of what I'm talking about. There's some negativity that just doesn't have a place in a support group, and Dr. Bash and things like that.
The first experience I had with the dizziness and support group, even though it was more of a chain of emails, it was through the MDDS Foundation, and it was very clumsy kind of forum, I guess. And it was a downer full on downer, and there wasn't anyone facilitating it. So, and it was very much of like, this is miserable. I hate my life. These things don't work. I tried that. This doesn't work. And so I do think you're right, Sarah. There is a place for, yes, there's a place for grieving and there's a place for facilitating the conversation so that it doesn't just end up being a cycle of nothing works and your life is over. Yeah. Actually, I think that's a good place because stories help us all. If there's anybody that's listening to this podcast today that's like, oh, I don't know about support groups, maybe this isn't for me. And I think sometimes just hearing how one person was impacted by this experience can help. So, David, I want to know, and you can share anonymously, but is there anyone that you can think of or a story you can think of where someone was impacted by your support group?
Yes, I have several, but I'm going to stick with one. When I first started my online support group, an individual came onto my group. One of the first sessions I had, maybe the second or third. It was in the beginning. She was presenting from her bed. She was in bed. She couldn't move out of her bed. She was at the end of her rope, like Sarah was talking about, and she had enough. She couldn't go on. She couldn't do anything else. I encouraged her to stay with this group, and with the other participants in the group and myself, we encouraged her to go on, and on she did. She finally got out of the bed, and she was sitting in a chair next time, and then finally she got out of the chair and she was walking eventually, and to this day she's still in my group, and she's a big part of that group because she spreads a lot of positivity. Like Sarah was talking about, we need positivity. She spreads a lot of positivity, and she is a leader in the vestibular community. So from in a bed,
Wow.
not doing anything, life's over, to a pillar of our vestibular community is probably the best story that I could give you from a support group standpoint.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Sarah, how about you? Do you have any stories that really stand out for you? Someone that really touched you that benefited from participating in your support group?
I can think of a lot of situations, a lot of people. One similar to David's, and I can talk about her. But I want to say that my guess is that people have been impacted more than we ever will know. There's probably just many cases of just the one little thing that someone took home and made a difference, or just a little glimmer of hope that kind of kept them moving and in the right direction. So I think that happens all the time in support groups. And it may not be like a story of, here to like here, but the person that sort of came to mind when you asked that question was a person that I met in April of 2020. She is not in Ohio. She's in a different state than I am, and she was just so scared and so hopeless, just thought that her life really had come to an end. She had been diagnosed with 3PD, and so she ended up came faithfully. She ended up I coached her in I have a coaching program, and she went through that program with me, and now she's at a point where she's still coming to support groups, but she's also helping me with a part of what I do with my coaching clients. So she's part of my team, and she's she's got a purpose that she thought she had lost her purpose in life. So
Wow.
that's been a real
Yeah.
meaningful story.
Yeah, not to be overly dramatic, but support groups can be literally life-saving. I mean, there are people who are going through um, challenges that make them question their sanity and whether they want to live. And the support and validation and compassion and love that the other people in the support group provide can be their lifeline.
Yeah. And I don't think it has to look like that person is always participating. I'm reminded of, of a story of this, again, going back to the Dougie Center. This is just the sweetest story, and I'll tell it really briefly. But there was a little boy who lost a parent. And for a year, he was nonverbal in the groups. He never communicated. The facilitators were worried about him, not thinking he was getting anything from the groups. He would always go to the corner, draw his little black and white paintings. It was just like constantly black and white, black and white. They had all sorts of different colors there for him to use. He only wanted to use black and white. A year of that. And then one day he marched in and he went over to the paints and he grabbed every single color and went into the other room and splashed them on the walls. And it just, like, everyone was just goosebumps because they knew, oh, something was happening to him over this last year. He was absorbing the love and the compassion and the solidarity, and he was ready to express himself differently. So I wanted to share that because sometimes I think people think, oh, I've got to share, I have to participate, and sometimes it's just enough to be there. So I'm curious, David, from all of your experience in virtual groups, in-person groups, online forums, there's so many different formats. What do you think the pros and cons of all these different platforms are?
That's a great question, Kimberly. Yeah. So I think three of these platforms are useful and useful in out there in the world, but there are differences. So the in-person group, I know Sarah runs an in-person group. Or she did. I used to run an in-person group myself as well. And I think those are more community-based. So most of your community comes out. Maybe your neighbors, your friends, family. Those groups. I think meeting face to face has a lot of value because you get to know each other a little bit more. You can almost reach out and touch people, and it seems real to a lot of people. The inverse of the in-person group is problems with how far apart people are. I use an example. I started in Maine, and it's a very rural state, and it's about 1 million people, but it's a huge state, and people would have to travel for miles to come to one support group. So it wasn't very feasible to have support groups all over the state. So we go into the virtual one, the online groups that we started. I think we talked about it a little bit earlier that we started actually before COVID hit, and we were ready to go when COVID came because we already were virtual. I think it came from an idea from our community support committee, which Cynthia and I are both on, that we felt we could reach more people if we could do it online for a few reasons. Now, geography is not an issue anymore. So my group, I can host people from all around the world, so that's not an issue. We took that barrier out. Some people have problems, especially vestibular patients, getting out of their house, driving. I couldn't drive for 4 years after my stroke, so I couldn't attend a group in person unless somebody were to drive me or take me there. So, those are some of the barriers that are helpful for the virtual online groups. And then we go to the next one, which is like the Facebook group we talked about. Those have benefits and cons as well. I think Sarah alluded to it. Sometimes they can get a little dark, and people get frustrated, and there's a lot of negativity in there. That is a definite problem sometimes. But the thing we talk about a lot, especially in like we talk about it in our community support community. If you go to Facebook, on my particular group, we have over 20,000 people on that page. So you can virtually go anytime of day or night, and you're probably going to find somebody else on that group that you can talk to. The drawback from a Facebook group versus the actual online group is it's not in real time. So you may ask a question, and you might get the answer, a minute later, or you might get it 3 days later. So it's not instant gratification Whereas the online in-person group, you're right there, you're talking about things, and you're working out things as you go. So those are the three different groups. They all have their challenges. They all have their place in the community. But I think if we put them all together, and you can use, I think the more pieces of communication that we have to help patients uh, understand this disorder, I think the better off we are in the long run.
Absolutely. That was a perfect comparison of those three different kinds of groups, David. Thank you. Sarah, I know you've led three different kinds of groups also, in person, virtual, and Facebook. Do you have anything to add to that?
Gosh, really, I was trying to think of something to add. You did such a fabulous, comprehensive pros and cons. Yeah, it's great that we
Thank you.
can support folks in all three venues.
David, I know that as Vita's community support coordinator, you mentor a lot of support group leaders, especially new support group leaders. What challenges do you think others have faced, or have you had in helping people to get a support group going?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is a lot of times people don't feel that they're qualified to do a support group. They feel that they have to have, some type of credentials, or lead a support group, or actually even, have a clinical definition behind their name. And I'm here to tell you, you don't have to have any of that. You have to have what I usually tell my support group leaders that are wanting to be support group leaders is you have to have a little bit of empathy, and you have to have a good ear and good skills to understand people and communicate with people. And that's what I usually tell our new support group leaders. It's sometimes, it's difficult to lead a group of people, especially, I know Sarah does an online group, I do an online group. And if I get a lot of people on one night, it's very challenging because you're trying to get everybody to talk. Like you said, we want to give everybody a chance to talk. But if you have a lot of people on that, sometimes that's hard. And what some of my advice to my support group leaders is, don't get frustrated with that. And conversely, I think Sarah alluded to it earlier, don't be frustrated, especially the new groups, if you only have one person or two people show up that night. It takes a while to build that. And like Sarah so well said, and that was my mantra the whole time, if I can help one person, that's a great thing, right? So that's what I always tell my support group leaders when they initially start, have a little patience. That group will grow. Once people get the word out there, we have a few new groups out there now, and they're doing very well. And I always tell them to make sure that you give it some time. Don't just not 3 months, and it's going to take a long time to build those relationships. Mm-hmm. And once you build those relationships, I have people, and I'm sure Sarah does, that come back month after month after month, and I've had this group going, I don't even know how long, maybe 7 years, 8 years, and some of the same people are still in that group. So those are the types of things that I would tell a new support group leader. Just if you have those skills, you can do that. You can do this job. And the other thing is, I tell them that Vita is here. I'm here to support them. If they have some questions, or if they need some materials, we're here to support them at Vita. So it's really a self-starting situation. So if you're thinking about starting a support group, whether online or in person, go ahead and get in contact with me or Vita, and we'll definitely help you along the way.
So I think I know the answer to this question, David, but I want to know what would you tell a patient who is just starting out on their journey and feels like nobody understands them?
Oh, yeah. I would tell them, first of all, that I know how they feel, because I can tell them that because I've taken that journey, and sometimes it's a long journey. But what I always tell new patients and patients that are just coming on board is one, it's really important to educate yourself on your disorders. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a therapist. You can go to a great website like vestibular.org, and you can learn a lot about your vestibular disorder. So I always encourage people to learn about their vestibular disorder, educate themselves. That way they can more logically talk to their physicians and their therapists. Hey, I saw this on a website. Is this something I can do? And sometimes the healthcare professionals will listen a little bit more if you're using the same words and you're using a lot of the terminology that they use. So those are one of the things. First of all, educate yourself. And find if you need some support, find it. Whether it be, we have a peer-to-peer program here at VITA that will take an individual and they'll help one-on-one, or we have our support groups. And as we speak, we're trying to build that support group. So we have lots of them out there. We have a fairly good amount now, and we've been building them. But one of the goals is somebody to be able to go on that VITA website and say, "Oh, there's a support group, and they need support right now. Maybe that group's tonight." And I've had several people tell me that. They said, "Hey, I went on VITA's site and I saw your support group, and you were meeting tonight when I saw that. So
Wow.
I joined your group because of that." They needed support right now. I tell them they can always call VITA, but a lot of times they need it right now. And one of the things I always tell people, like when the support group leaders are starting, especially the online groups, the in-person ones are a little different, but the online groups, sometimes that person only needs support for maybe 1 or 2 months. They're not always there for the long term. And that's not a bad thing. If we can give the people the support they need at the time they need it, that may get them over the hump, and they may feel better about themselves as they move forward. So
Wow.
that I always tell people, especially with that, don't be frustrated. You see somebody for a few months and they're gone. Sometimes they may come back in a year. Those type of things are some of the things that you work out in an online support group.
Wow. Well
Beautifully
said,
said,
David.
David. Yeah, absolutely. And to add on to that, we would like to develop more support groups. And I have this vision of vestibular clinics across the world, all having a support group, so that, as you said, no matter where you are and what time zone you're in, there is a support group meeting and a support group available. Sarah, what would you say to other vestibular healthcare providers who maybe have thought about starting a support group? Maybe they're reticent for one reason or another. What do you think the benefits are for a healthcare provider to provide that kind of service to their patients?
Oh, I think the benefits are immense, both for, like you said, what a fabulous vision. If you've got a clinic and you're providing that emotional support as well, and that educational support, it's just going to ramp up the excellence, and your outcomes in your clinic with your patients are just going to explode, because we are whole people with emotional and mental needs, not just the rehabilitation needs. So and I think as a whole, the vestibular profession is learning more and more. When I started, when I took my first vestibular course back in the late 80s, it was just hardly anything, and now it's just we just know so much about how the vestibular system encompasses our whole body. It's connected to our emotions even. So I just think to have a support group in your clinic just will, it will make it would make that clinic the gold standard in that area for sure. Professionally, like as a clinician, it has being involved in this way has greatly improved my ability to listen, to to perceive different points of view. My coaching skills have improved in this. In with being this in this facilitating kind of role. I think it exposes you to a lot of different sorts of vestibular issues, a lot of different, at least the online groups. I've got, people that are coming from Canada to the group, so different areas of the country. You just learn so much. And I think it broadens your ability to be an excellent clinician. So yeah, do it. Start a group.
It sounds like it would be a great model for not just vestibular healthcare practitioners, but any healthcare practitioner, so that they could really see their patients in a much more whole perspective, the spiritual, the mental, the emotional. So I'm putting in my vote for not just vestibular healthcare professionals, but all healthcare professionals for running support groups.
And I want to just repeat what you said. One of the things you said, which is so important, is that it improves clinical outcomes. It really is. It's not just, it makes people feel better. It actually, having that, that emotional support gives you the ability to deal with, to better cope with the physical challenges that you're going through, and you will recover more quickly.
Yeah, and also I wanted to add Natalie, who is a vestibular therapist. She co-hosts my online group. She says the same thing as you, Sarah. She loves coming to these groups. It helps her as a clinician, and it helps the patients that she touches. Yeah, I definitely can see that from your point of view, and that's exactly what she is telling me every time she comes. I thank her so much. I know you guys are super busy and you have a huge workload, but she joins me at 7:00 once a month, and I really appreciate the input that she does. So
amazing! What an amazing conversation.
I want to thank both of you, not only for joining us in this conversation, but for all you do to support vestibular patients. Yeah. I mean, you're the the rock of our organization, and providing peer support, providing support to vestibular patients is so important. Providing the support where they are when they need it. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Absolutely, thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to ICU this month.
We hope this conversation sparked new understanding of the vestibular journey, and for all of our patients out there, leaves you feeling just a little more heard and a little more seen. I see you.